Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you're watching this. I am David Bowler, grad connection. My goal is to try to help graduates do more than just survive. I want you to thrive in graduate school. That's what we're all about. Last video that I put out there was talking about kind of what was calling the daily discipline. And at the beginning of that video, I talked about how the daily discipline, there's this daily discipline, and then there's this weekly discipline, and then there's like a semi-annual, quarterly, however you look at it, view as well. So I'm gonna kind of take the next step and talk about what I mean by the weekly discipline. So we already talked about how the daily discipline you're looking at trying to spend 15 minutes a day on physical, on the spiritual, on the relational, on the professional. So we talked about that. Now what we want to do is talk about week. What are some of the larger things, larger goals have things that you want to accomplish in each of these areas? Um, for me, the obvious one is setting goals professionally, but then as well as having kind of like what I would say weekly goals physically, and then the other two, as far as spiritually and relationally, it just really kind of depends. And you can basically in a week you can set a major goal in each of those areas, or you could just pick one or two. As I've talked about, this idea or this concept was something I learned from something called Wake Up Warrior, and the intent there was that you really only focus on professional doing it, because the intent was, or at least the philosophy was, try to set major goals every week in each of those four areas. It's just too much. Well, I don't know that I agree with that philosophy. I like to try to definitely have a professional goal every week. I kind of have a general physical goal every week, and then spiritually and relationally, it's more contextual, and it depends on that week. So let me talk a little bit more about what I mean by this. So essentially, what you want to do is when you look, and when I do this, I typically use maybe Sundays or Saturdays are usually kind of my days of reflection. When I kind of take a look back, I say, okay, this past week, what things went well, what things didn't work well, and I kind of look at it from a couple different vantages. Um, so first of all, it's like, okay, where am I seeing results in my life, right? So like if I'm focusing physically, so like a physical goal that I have that's more of a weekly kind of thing is I at least want to get my goal is to get five workouts in. And that could be working, that could be lifting weights, that could be walking. This is just for me personally, right? Um, but the minimum would be three. So I know I'm really off kilter if I don't get at least three workouts in. And those are usually about an hour or so. Sometimes hour and a half, sometimes half an hour. It just depends. And again, I think all of this you have to adapt to your life. I don't think I would encourage not getting too rigorous with it, because if you're too rigid with it, it's not going to be sustainable, because essentially you're going to beat yourself up and you're going to give up on it. So physically, like my weekly view or my weekly look, if you will, is basically okay. Relative to exercise, am I getting 3 to 5 in? My goal is, best would be five, least would be three. Am I getting proper? Did I get a proper amount of rest that week? Did I get a balanced diet that week? Those kinds of things. So my weekly goal, as it relates to, or my weekly view of the discipline, is okay. How am I doing physically? Is it work? First of all, what are results am I seeing? Am I kind of sustaining weight? Am I gaining weight? Am I losing weight? Am I getting my workouts in? Right. So first is, what are the results that I'm seeing? And these need to be quantifiable measures. So you'll notice that I'm counting the number. The challenge with weight, if you just look at like a weight loss goal, is that it's not always an accurate measure of progress, right? So particularly as you start working out, if you've never done any workout at all, again, I'm not a dietitian, I'm not an exercise coach. I'm just telling you what my experience is and what I've learned over the last 3 or 4 years relative to doing this relative to myself, is that, when you first started working out, yeah, you're going to probably see some weight loss. But at some point, you're probably going to hit a plateau, and then you actually may see yourself gain weight, particularly like if you're lifting weight, right? So again, I've talked about how cardio helps you burn calories, but it doesn't necessarily shift your body composition or allow you to basically change the way you look. You'll shrink, I suppose, one way to say it, but you're probably not going to see muscle growth, those kinds of things, just from doing cardio. So I'll say again, coming back to just raw weight is probably not a good measure um, overall, simply because weight shifts. I know for myself. Now, I say don't measure. I say don't look at weight, but obviously, I'll tell you the truth that I pretty much weigh myself every day, and most people will be that for. It's just, and over time, because I've done that, it's pretty much I've got this routine where I basically right before I get in the shower, basically weigh myself, and I can see that my weight fluctuates around probably 3 or 4 pounds. So, my let's be honest with you, I might be down to 181. It might go up to 184, right? So that's kind of where I've averaged out or evened out at. When I first started losing weight, I got all the way down to like 165. That was when I was just doing cardio, and then when I started lifting weights, eating more protein, those kinds of things, all of a sudden my weight started to go back up. I've kind of evened out around hovering around the 180 to 185 range, and that's according to BMI. And again, I'm not a big, when you look at BMI, when you look at weight, I don't know that you can live and die by those things. I'll say because I know I have higher muscle mass, and so I don't know that BMI is an accurate record if you actually have more muscle, right? So you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. But what you're looking for in each of the areas is how can you quantify this? So relative to my physical discipline every week, looking at it, I'm looking at, okay, how many workouts did I get? Did I take my vitamins every day? How am I eating? Those kinds of. So basically, a reflective exercise so where I say, okay, here are the results that I'm getting. What did I get this week? Where did I fall short? Right, and then second, how does that make me feel? Um, do I feel bad because I missed my workouts, or I feel good because I got them all in, or whatever? And then second is then, okay, given the results I have and how I feel, what can I attend to? What can I change or do different? That is better, faster, cheaper, easier, whatever, to get different results. Because the thing, and we all, this is a kind of a cliche saying, but people all the time say, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting different results. Well, if that's true, I mean, well, we can joke and tongue in cheek that kind of comment, but there is truth to that statement. And so if you reflect over the week and you say, okay, well, I didn't like the results I got, but I'm not going to change anything, thinking that you're going to do something different, it's not going to work. So you got to figure out what are you going to change up in the next week that's going to make things better, right? So, as you start to get on an exercise routine, I've advocated, getting up a half an hour to an hour earlier to get all these disciplines in. And just, did you do that every day? Right. And so you look back at it, and, okay, something maybe I'm not getting up every day, when I need to get up because I'm staying up too late at night. Maybe I'm eating too late. Maybe what are the things that are getting in the way? If you think in any of these areas of your life that you're going to try to implement a new discipline, you're going to try to change what you're doing, or you're going to try to get different results, you're not going to get different results if you don't do something different. So this weekly game of looking at what did I do this past week in each of these areas, that's what it's about, is kind of just being honest about it. And then last, the reality is it working for you? Is what you're seeing? So we're looking at results, we're looking at feel. So what are your results? How does that make you feel? What do you need to attend to do something different? And the reality is, will it work, right? Or is it working, right? And so you're looking in each of these four areas: physical, spiritual, relational, and professional. You're kind of looking at this lens. Again, this activity weekly shouldn't take all that long. We're talking like a half an hour to think through these things about where you're making progress and where you're not. That's number one. You want to look at where you've been, what happened this last week, and then where you're going, right? So that's what I'm talking about relative to this: is results, feeling, tension, right? And work reality situation. And you want to do this across the physical. When I look at my spiritual weekly game, I'm looking at, for me personally, it's about because I'm a music minister, that kind of thing. I'm looking at songs. I'm thinking about, and because this is all tied together, right? For my spiritual growth, my spiritual activity, spiritual discipline. I'm looking at, I'm listening to music all the time. It's like I'm picking songs for what we're going to do at church service. I go to the church service. It's and occasionally there'll be other kinds of things, and a word that's often used, or I've heard used before, is something called a pattern interrupt. So anywhere in any of these four areas, just getting into the mechanism of doing the same thing over and over and over again will get monotonous, You'll plateau in that you're not going to grow and expand if you keep doing the same thing all the time, because we settle into habits all the time as human beings. We get used to, something comfortable. I posted a video that probably it's the post right before this. There was this video, and she talks about how you basically either have a break, or basically habitual brain versus a pattern of change brain, right? I don't know what she used exactly, but that's what we're talking about here. Is if you keep doing the same thing over and over, habitual, and you'll grow and expand beyond where you are currently. It's change that causes us to go further. It's change that causes it by changing up what we do, whether it feels good or not. And not 9 times 10, you're not going to feel like changing it up. But it's only by changing it up, changing what we do in each of these four areas, that causes us to expand and grow. We keep doing the same thing, we get habitual, we get in a pattern, and we plateau. That's just the reality of how it works. If you want to constantly grow and expand in all four areas of life, you have to attend to, not just daily, but also weekly. What are the things you're going to do different in the coming week? What are you going to set as targets or as goals, or whatever word you want to use there, up to where you're going, right? And that's the key to this. And part of this is a reflection exercise weekly, thinking about, okay, where have I been in these four areas of my life? And then in the coming week, where do I want to go? First and foremost, you have to be absolutely butt honest, buck naked honest about where you are. If you lie to yourself and, oh, it was okay that I only got one work in this week, I'll get better next week. Bull crap. You won't do that. Get in the habit, like the environment I come from, you get into a habit of not going to church or not doing your spiritual disciplines, whatever that is for you. It's easy to write that off and not do it the next day, right? It just becomes habitual and a pattern. You have to change up your game, and you have to be honest about where you are. Continuing to lie to yourself about where you are, and the honesty. If you were truly honest with yourself, and you looked back at where you've come from, right? Other where you are right now, and what you've done in the past. If there's an area of your life that's weak, it's probably because you basically let it slide, right? You did not attend to it. You just kind of defaulted to whatever the pattern was that either you learned or you developed over time, and that's kind of where you. I mean, I'll say for myself, that's kind of. I mean, when I was younger, I was basically skinny, very. I was like 129 pounds, right? Coming out of high school, you could blow on me and I'd probably blow away. I was just thin. Um, but over time, I never attended to my health. I never had to, because I just had a high, I guess, good metabolism, whatever. I could eat whatever I want, and I didn't really gain any weight, but a little bit over time, like, a couple pounds this year, 5 pounds next year, and all of a sudden, I'm pushing 210 by the time I'm almost 40. I guess I would 46, 45, 46 in there. And all of a sudden, I'm starting having these health issues. Essentially, I developed that habit by not attending to it and just kind of letting it go. That's how I got there. And you can look at your physical, right? You could say that if you have no spiritual life, it's probably because you've never attended. So you need to dig into it and figure out, what does that mean for you, right? It means different things to different people. I'm not going to prescribe for you, and inflict what I think on you. If you want to know, we can have that conversation. But you need to figure out what that is for you. Your relationships, you let your relationships slide, definitely, you'll be alone. And, that's not, in my opinion, that's not healthy. You have to find a way to invest in relationships, and the same thing professionally, right? All right, so this weekly game that I'm talking is looking at all four of your areas of your life, being truly honest with yourself, saying, okay, here are the results I have. This is how it makes me feel. This is what I need to attend to. Right? This is what I need to focus on, change, or do different, particularly if I'm dissatisfied. Sometimes the attention would be just, yeah, I just need to keep doing what I'm doing, right? I just need to keep after it, right? And then the last is the reality of it. Is it working for you or not? Ultimately, you have to be. And the other thing I would say is, there are things that come into your life, and this could be thoughts, this could be habits, could be pattern, it could be people. But you have to be willing to let go of things that don't serve you. Right? Things that, and this is not a judgment on the things that you allow in your life, but there are going to be things that come into your life that you allow in your life for a period of time, and you're going to grow past a point where those things, those thoughts, those people, those feelings, those places, those things no longer serve you. And you have to be willing to let those things go. Right? There's a point at which you have to let things go out of you. And this may, this is the easiest way to talk about it is relative to people. I mean, as you move through your life and you grow through your life, people will come into your life and they may be there for a period of your life, and you may glean something from them, whether that be knowledge or relationship or whatever it happens to be, and then you may grow past a point, or you may want to go somewhere where the relationship no longer serves you. Doesn't mean that you totally shut them out of your life, but you may spend less time with them because you grow through this, so that relationally that happens. Be willing to let go of things that don't serve you. Anything that's holding you back from growing, from expanding, and most importantly, stop sucking, where you don't suck anymore, you suck less at least. You have to let those things. So that's the reflective part. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, okay, how do you figure out what are the how do you figure out the goal, right? In other words, if I see where I'm at this week, and I know next week I want to do something different. How do I set goals, targets? How do I do that? How do I even know what I need to do? And probably one of the best tools that I know to do this is something called the time matrix. Now, I don't know. I don't remember how long ago it was that I drew this image on my whiteboard in my office. But I was talking with some colleagues, people that I work with, and I was trying to explain to them this concept of time matrix. And so I kind of quickly drew this image that you see behind me. And so I want to talk through it a little bit. Essentially, the time matrix, many people became familiar with it through the Stephen Covey book called The Seven Habits of Highly Successful People. But it actually predates that. It's actually called the Eisenhower, as in Dwight Eisenhower, the World War II, as well as president, that kind of thing. And you can look up Eisenhower Matrix. I'd encourage you to do a little bit of homework on it, but it actually predates Stephen Covey, even though that's where most people are familiar with. But essentially, the way this works is it basically creates this scale, and you'll see on the left hand side here it says and it basically breaks down tasks into important and urgent, right? It looks at it through that lens. So you have important over here. Is the task important? Is the task urgent? Right? And so the key is that this can help you decide what you need to do in the coming week, particularly professionally, right? Most people don't hit any targets through the week because they don't have any targets through the. It's just they allow life to dictate what those targets are, rather than looking at, okay, what are the things that are going to cause me to professionally grow, rather than just letting life come at me by default and just kind of keep up and try to do the next thing. Same thing physically, same thing relationally. Some people just go through their relationships by default and just let it unfold. Whatever will be, kind of the Doris Day philosophy. That doesn't work very well. Your relationships are not going to grow if you don't have goals, if you don't have aims, if there aren't things that you're trying to accomplish in your relationships. I mean, I don't know why you would think your relationships grow in a positive way. Your profession's not going to grow if you don't put any effort or put any planning into it. If you just let it happen by default, you're going to end up where you end up, and God only knows where that would be. You can say the same thing physically, spiritually, relationally, and professionally, right? This is true in all three. So, or all four, excuse me. And so the point is how do you target the things that you need to do? This time matrix helps you do that, because let me talk through it and I'll explain a little bit what I mean. So, you'll notice that first of all, it is divided in important and urgent, right? And there are basically four quadrants. Um, I wanted to start quadrant two, which is tasks that are not urgent but that are important. That's the place you want to be, as I've listed here. These are items that you plan. These are items that you schedule. This is how you are going to grow. This is where you want to focus your energy. This is where you want to focus your time. This is about time matrix. It's also about managing your energy. Some would argue that, it's even more important that you manage your energy, and that is where you expend energy, because energy is a limited resource for us as human beings, on a daily, on a weekly, on whatever time frame you want to look at. It is a limited resource. There's a couple of really good articles from the Harvard Business Review talk about how business people should manage their energy, kind of like an athlete manages themselves relative to their particular sport. Talk about that on another, and if any of you are interested in that article, let me know and I can send it to you. I'll probably forget to put it in the show notes here thing, but nevertheless, if you're interested in that article. So quadrant two is where you want to focus your energy, right? Another way to describe quadrant two is it's the big rocks in your life. If you don't know what I'm talking about by big rocks, I'd encourage you to go to YouTube. Look for the big rocks in life. I think you could probably find. Basically, it's a video that shows. It's basically an analogy, a physical analogy of how you should schedule things in life. I'm not going to talk more about that. But long story short, quadrant two is where you can kind of set your mid and long term accomplishments or goals, right? It's where you're going to see professional growth. It is the place professionally and in every other area of life that you really want to live because basically you're being intentional about what it is that you're doing. Pretty much the other, well, and I would say quadrant four, which we'll talk about here in a minute, where it says sedation and time wasters. That's intentional too, but kind of in a negative light, I suppose. So essentially, when I say when it's not urgent, you can be more intentional about what you choose to do. If it's urgent, you don't really have a whole lot of choice. You kind of have to do it. You're being pressured to do it either because of time or other people, right? So quadrant two is the place you want to work, right? That's the place you want to be. Quadrant one, let's move over to it. Quadrant one I have listed here as firefighting or burnout. It's basically things that are urgent and they are important. So these are emergencies that you have to deal with. What else? There and oftentimes, we call it firefighting. So if you are constantly running from one emergency to another emergency, and well, there are certain people's lives who are kind of based on this, like an emergency worker or something. That's one thing. But to live here, you will burn out. I promise. If you try to live here for very long, you will have much anxiety. You'll have a lot of stress, and it's very difficult to have any kind of purposeful planning because you're always reactive. You're never, you're always reacting to something, right? You really can't schedule these things. So quadrant one is and in a lot of cases, there are times in your business life and in other areas of your life you're going to be working in a firefighting mode. If you suddenly get sick, you're in firefighting mode because you need to attend to yourself and try to get yourself well. If you get in a fight with your significant other or one of your kids or somebody who's close to you, all right, you're in firefighting mode. You need to get that resolved, fixed, or the relationship's going to go down the tube, right? So there are times where you have to work in quadrant one, but you want that to be not all the time. You want it to be as little time as possible, in my opinion, because ultimately, by being able to strategize and plan for quadrant two activities, basically it reduces stress and anxiety and it will increase your productivity in all areas of life, right? Whether that's in the physical, spiritual, relational, or professional. So that's quadrant one. Quadrant three, right? This is other people's stuff. These are what I would call distractions, which where people come to you with problems that you need to solve. Oftentimes, they're unplanned things. Oftentimes, stuff that comes from quadrant three is because other people have not planned very well. And I like the old adage that says, a lack of planning on your part doesn't necessitate an emergency on my part, even though most people think it does, right? So it's quadrant three basically are other people's stuff that you have to deal with. And now let me make a note here. If your boss, like speaking professionally, if your boss comes to you and has an emergency, that's not a quadrant three activity. That is a quadrant one activity, right? And it's important that you don't treat your boss's uh, emergencies like a quadrant three activity. It has to be a quadrant one. I would also say, your significant other, why you might want to classify it as a quadrant three activity. If you do that very long, your relationship's not going to last very quadrant. Same thing with kids, people that are close to you. That's the commitment of your relationship is you're there for it, right? And so those items become quadrant one. Now, on the flip side, I will tell you, kind of as an analog or what do I say, just to further that, you can tell a lot by a boss, and usually within the first year, you're going to learn very quickly whether that boss functions in quadrant one or quadrant two. So is your boss always dealing with emergencies, never really planning, kind of only always reactive, or is your boss kind of does schedule things, does try to have foresight and that kind of thing? Now, it would be at certain levels you're going to get to a point where people don't rise to the level of leadership if they don't operate in quadrant two most of the time. But you will find people that are end up in a leadership position who really don't have the skills and they're constantly operating in Q1. So just realize that if your boss is constantly in quadrant one, so are you. If your boss is quadrant two, you're going to be there too, right? And oftentimes, I'll say oftentimes what ends up happening is that People leave bosses. People don't leave jobs; they leave bosses. Old adage that you see online all the time. But people don't leave. But I would say people leave those bosses because those bosses either spend too much time in Q1 or they spend too much time in Q4, and either of those is detrimental to you if your boss is in those quadrants. Now, I would say you could say the same thing about relationships, right? Relationships that constantly are in Q1, you're going to be living in drama world forever. It's going to be an emotional roller coaster. It's going to be dysfunctional. It's going to be toxic. So just that's something to recognize as well. And if that's the kind of thing you choose, okay, just know what you're choosing when you choose it, and it may wear you out. Just depends on what kind of person you are, right? So speaking of quadrant four, let's go on and talk about quadrant four. I have listed here as sedation or time waster, right? So quadrant four is basically things that are not urgent and not important, so they're not actually propelling you forward necessarily. Professionally, I like to talk about these things as I say there's sedation techniques. So sedation technique is basically anything we use um, to avoid getting something done. Oftentimes we talk about vegging out or use it to escape. Um, and essentially all of these are sedation activities. And I will say, if a sedation activity, a time waster, if you spend too much time in quadrant four, it will destroy you. It will destroy you professionally if you spend too much time there. It'll destroy your relationships. You spend too much time there. If you could look at it, if you sedate too much, now everybody needs some sedation in their life. We all need to kind of like check out and just, um, get away from things. Oftentimes, this would be, and as I wrote on the screen here, it says, YouTube, Netflix, Facebook, TikTok, right? That would fall into that category as well. Just realize if you spend too much time there, yeah, you get yourself in trouble, right? It just is going to be demise. So this is kind of, and so I present this overall time matrix to say, okay, when you're thinking about the things that you want to get done, anything significant that you want to get done in the four areas of life in a particular week, what you want to use, what you want to try to do is think about that something that's important but not urgent. So physically, that might be, a goal for me this week might be to actually walk an additional mile, right? That it's not urgent that I do that if I'm already walking 2 to 4 miles, a day. But maybe I want to tack on it, or maybe my wife works nights, and so maybe a goal for me this week is when she works and time change is getting ready to happen. So oftentimes I like when the time changes because it seems like right after work I have more daylight, so I can actually go outside and walk. And when I walk outside, I typically walk a whole lot more than if I were on a treadmill. But maybe, and so this weekend, probably one of the things that I'm going to be thinking about is, okay, I know Lisa works on Monday, Tuesday this week. And so, all right, I'm going to at least one of those 2 days, I'm going to go walk at least an additional 4 miles in the neighborhood one night, one night after she goes to work. That would be an example of a not urgent, but an important thing for me to do. Last summer, I saw a tremendous benefit of walking. I was walking like crazy last summer. And so, actually, yeah, I think it was last summer. Anyway, might have been 2019. Anyway, I saw a huge benefit of just walking, right? So that would be one. Relationally, what would be an example? An example of relation is something that's not urgent but important. It's thinking about, okay, this week I want to what do I want to do for date night with my wife? If you have a significant other or a spouse, I would encourage you to carve out at least one night a week where you go and you continue to date one another. Relationships get stale and they get sour because we quit pursuing each other. If you can continue the pursuit even after you're married, even after you've been together a long time, whatever the case may be, relationships sour when they get stale. And if you allow it to get stale, that's your problem. You need to figure out how to keep it from getting stale. Become innovative. Figure out things. I'm always looking for things myself. I'm always looking for things that I can do with Lisa that kind of break the cycle, right? Date night is one of the things that I think is important. I was talking to her. I'm just being honest with you. I was talking to her this week, and I said, because of COVID and all this stuff, I think we've kind of gotten out of date night. Obviously, because we can't go places and stuff like we used to, but you can still have a date night even if you can't go anywhere. Could be going out and sitting, and And I'll say when the weather tends to get nicer, we tend to spend more time outside and stuff, and probably even if we're still sequestered because of COVID and that kind of thing, we can still get outside and do some stuff, as within our little clusters or cells or whatever you want to call them. And so, what I would say is trying to plan that. I would encourage you to figure out a way to keep the pursuit up, right? To keep the pursuit going. Figure out innovative things that you can do. Some things that come to mind relative to relationships, I encourage you to look at. One thing that we did for a while was there was this thing called the Love Box, which monthly you would get this thing sent to you, and it had an activity for you, your significant other to do together. And it was all kinds of stuff. We did it for about 3 or 4 months, and it was fun, but we kind of grew old, and so we quit doing that. There's an app that my son mentioned to me, something called the Love Nudge, which basically functions on the five love languages and allows you and your significant other to kind of plug in what is your love language, and then the app kind of hints to the person, to the like to Lisa in my case, she'll tell her, what are the things that you can do that actually tap into my love language, right? I think I might have mentioned. So there are things that you can do, but anyway, figuring out what is the non-urgent but important thing that you can do to propel at least one of your relationships forward this week, right? So that'd be relationships spiritually. It could be, um, let's see, figuring out a particular book that you want to read, or something new that you want to, or some new activity. Maybe I want to get an extra, or maybe I want to meditate a bit longer. Maybe I want to read an additional sacred text or book or scripture or whatever it is to uh, figuring out what you can do. And then professionally, that's usually the easiest, is figuring out, okay, what do you need? What can you propel yourself forward? If you're a graduate student, do you have a plan for, can you make some progress on your dissertation or thesis this week? Can you make some progress on maybe a journal article or a conference proceeding? I know conference is kind of thin right now because of COVID, but that's what I'm talking about. Is, what can you propel yourself? What one thing that's not urgent but that is important that can help you propel your degree forward, propel yourself forward in some area of your professional life as a graduate student? What is it? Right? You know what it is. If you sit and think long enough, you'll figure out what it is, and it may not be something that you feel like doing, but it's something you need to get done. Right? So make that a target, make that a goal, make that something that you're going to get done. I would encourage you, as I've been doing now, it doesn't seem like very many people are taking me up on it, but I would encourage you to leave a comment and let me know, number one, what you think about this. Right? What do you think about this content that I'm providing? You find it helpful? What's your one takeaway? And what's one thing that you need to do this week that you've kind of been avoiding, right? That right? So this is kind of what I would tell you, kind of a thing that you can actually use to help you plan not only significant things weekly. Now we're going to go on and we're going to talk about, okay, how do you look at this as a quarterly type of scenario, or even a semi? But quarterly is usually what I look at. Now at the end of the year, I almost always do kind of a reflection activity across the entire year to figure out where I've come from and what I've done. Something that really, really, really helps with that is journaling. So I would encourage, again, if you're not journaling every day, or at least every other day or whatever, I would encourage you to start doing that, because it kind of gives you a written record of where you've been, where you're going, your thoughts, and kind of how you've progressed, particularly when you start to look at it over a year. It's really hard to do that because I mean, as human beings, we have amnesia, very forget too easily. And so I would encourage you to do that. So a couple kind of closing comments on the time matrix. First of all, focus and schedule Q2 activities and stick to them. Do whatever you have to do to get yourself motivated. You're not going to feel like it, but you got to figure out how to get yourself motivated. It's basically, this video that I posted right before this, one of the concepts in there is basically between, and this is my word, this is the way I would describe it. It's basically between the time that you have an idea to the time where you talk yourself out of doing that idea is about 5 seconds. So figure out what you can do. It kind of goes with what I had presented earlier, what I had talked about earlier, from talking about Stanier, talking about what can you do in 60 seconds. Now, so long story short, focus and schedule in quad 2 and stick. Do what you must to limit quadrant 1. Limit your time there as much as possible. It'll burn you up. Delegate it if you can. And remember, if it's your boss, it's not a choice. You kind of have to figure out how to get it done or how to squeeze it in. Third, do your best to avoid and delegate Q3 items. Try to avoid other people's stuff, and if you can, again, delegate it. And then number four, some of Q4 is necessary. That is, some of the time wasters and sedation is necessary, but limit it and don't get trapped. Right. So, all right, let's switch back to this other camera view here. Close out. So this session has been talking about, okay, what's the weekly game look like? How do you go about planning those weekly games? Hopefully, you've gotten a good sense. If you have, questions or whatever you want to talk about that, I'm open to one-on-ones or talks. Again, I just want to remind you, there's several ways you can get this content. Obviously, if you're seeing this video, you're catching it from YouTube. I'd encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn because I do post some stuff that I post there. I don't put in YouTube videos. Third, you could connect with me on Facebook if you wish personally, but even if you don't connect with me personally on Facebook, I'd encourage you to look at the Graduate Connection. It's a private Facebook group. Apply to get access so that you can connect with other graduate students. I think will be beneficial and helpful. Just a couple things I want to mention as kind of follow-ups that you could do to this video. First of all, there's a book called The Five Choices. I don't have the actual book here. It's probably in my office at work. But it's basically about how you can it kind of extends this time matrix concept and helps you kind of focus on trying to help figure out what things you can do. I mentioned earlier the book called The Seven Habits of Highly Successful People, very widely respected book by Stephen Covey. Really good book, and it's a pretty easy read. It's one of those books where I try to return to it every now and then, just to refresh myself on that material. That's a good place. Another thing you could do is online, if you don't have the money to buy books, you could actually do some study into the Eisenhower Matrix and actually find out some more about what I've talked about here, the Eisenhower Matrix or the time matrix. And then lastly would be to review the Big Rocks video that I mentioned earlier, just to kind of get it. It's a great analogy, and most people are familiar with it, but if you've never seen that video. So with that, again, I'm Jamie Muller. This is the Graduate Connection. I hope you found this useful. As I said, most of the time, Fridays seem to be the time where I have time to actually create the videos and post it. So hopefully you're finding it useful. I wish nothing for you but health, and success, and most importantly, I'd like to see you expand, grow, and to not suck. So have a great day. Thanks.